So Grubhub, it's the food delivery service we all know. Like many brands, they're engaging consumers in the real world. So in 2019, they created a piece of IP, a program called Soundbites, which was a live concert series. They'd have 250, 300 consumers come to a live concert, and then they would broadcast that later on YouTube and they'd post it on their socials. So enter COVID, the entire live music industry, like everything else, shut down. So Grubhub had to reinvent how they were going to connect with consumers. So what they did is they took this program, Soundbites, and they turned it into a virtual experience. So they partnered with a company called First Two Media, which is a company that creates brand IP. They produce, they distribute, and they market digital experiences. So live stream, concert experiences, virtual experiences. So Grubhub took this and they started doing it as a virtual experience. And what happened was they started to see the reach just grow just tremendously. If you go to the next slide, you'll start to see what happened when they took this sort of pre, during, post marketing framework. They would create branded assets and distribute them across social channels and YouTube, and they would get 4 million people to engage with it. Then during the moment, the live tune-in moment, they started getting 2.6 million views. This is one example. This is one broadcast, and they've done this multiple times. So they got 2.6 million views. And the really interesting thing to me is that they drove over 18,000 orders from that live experience. So here they were really getting people in that moment to not just engage with the brand, but actually transact and take the opportunity to engage with the product itself, or the service in this case. And then 75% were likely to order a week after. And then of course there was still the post stream, social and YouTube and all that sort of good stuff that got additional reach after that. So what Grubhub did was, like I said, they started taking this and they repeated this formula, and they're seeing tremendous success. And what's happened is what started as a 250, 300 person live event has now turned into TV-sized audiences when you think about the reach and the engagement that they're getting through these virtual experiences. So when you look forward, Grubhub is likely going to, it's not an either or, I think it's both. They're going to, hopefully go back to live experiences, but add this layer of this virtual digital experience on top of it and give it that incremental reach. And if you look here, this is, and Peter can speak to this as well, but this is where we look at the role of a company like First Two Media, where we have in-person events, we have virtual events, and how do you connect the two? And how does a company like Grubhub not just post content on YouTube, but actually make it work for them really hard and get that engagement, get that reach, get those orders to come in, And that's where these companies, these complement companies like First Two Media play a critical role.
Yeah, so when we speak of platforms, we often think of, for example, the YouTube. But the reality is that the value of these platforms are also greatly enhanced by what we call complements. These are other companies that build additional value on these platforms. So when we are doing our analysis of experience platforms, we're not just looking at the YouTubes of the world. We're looking at the ecosystems that are evolving around this and the specialized companies that are emerging to provide that additional value. So as Joe mentioned, First Tube actually does a lot to make the Grubhub experience and the reach actually happen, right? So they schedule the media, they work with the artists, they kind of pull together. If Grubhub had just tried to do an event on YouTube, they would not have gotten anywhere near this level of engagement. So what becomes interesting is, Joe Pine just mentioned companies like Marriott and MasterCard offering experiences. Well, they're not necessarily the ones actually doing it. They're actually reaching out and building an ecosystem of complements that enable them to then deliver, because an experience happens in part, through the creative process of bringing in, sometimes it's artists, it can be other types of people who have specialized expertise, enable that engagement. But it's the understanding of the way that this can be platformized and how platforms work and can be reinforced to take those special moments and then scale them in incredible ways. So that's what we, a key insight into this space. And so it seems like pretty simple on the surface, but actually to execute a successful engagement strategy around experience platforms takes a lot more, and you got to really think through what that ecosystem looks like.